Saints Row is back in a 2022 reboot that sees developer Volition bring the series up to date with a newly enhanced in-house engine. It's a new Saints Row for a new generation and with a more grounded tone. Come its August 23rd release, we'll be able to see how all consoles stack up between PS5, Series X, and even last-gen machines. But for today, well, I was lucky enough to go hands-on with an early preview build of Saints Row on PC. Specifically, the PC at the press event sports a generous i7-7700K CPU backed by an RTX 3080. So more than enough GPU firepower to get a flavour at least of some 4K 60fps gameplay. Does the PC showing here, running at max settings, hint at a satisfying visual overhaul since the last Saints Row, that being Saints Row 4 or Get Out of Hell? What visual tricks does Saints Row 2022 have up its sleeve in its settings menu? And could we expect features like ray-traced ambient occlusion on show here to appear in its PS5 and Series X release come launch day? Let's dig in and see what's on show so far. Before we start, this Saints Row reboot is committed to its blank slate, to starting afresh with a new setting of Santo Ileso and a new crew of characters hell-bent on taking it over. Certainly compared to 2013's Saints Row 4, there's a tonal shift. The last numbered mainline entry went full genre satire, within minutes putting us in the shoes of a president taking on an alien invasion with heavy artillery. By comparison, today's reboot feels a little more grounded, just a touch. Even so, the reboot finds its own moments of chaos. So, as is series tradition, there's a tutorial sequence of sorts to follow before the map opens up properly for you to explore. Every moment here cranks the explosions up to operatic levels, filling the screen with fire and bullets as you edge your way through a Wild West set. As a showcase for Volition's engine, in a tight scripted sequence away from the chaos of its open world, it's a perfect opener. And yes, scrolling through the settings, I've gone all in. So we have a native 4K resolution, ray-traced ambient occlusion set to ultra, and indeed all the other settings entirely maxed out. Right away, materials and lighting in Volition's latest are a huge leap in quality over previous Saints Row games. Gone are the flat, simplistic shaders for skin and clothing, now replaced with more realistically lit materials. In fact, regardless of how you craft your character, and there's boundless possibilities in the tools, there's always a respectable baseline level for model quality. Likewise for the environment, texture quality is sharp, tapping into the 10GB of VRAM reserved in our RTX 3080. All round, the world detail level here is already clearly more befitting of a project meant for a PS5 or Series X release. Getting into the action itself, car headlights are punctuated by a striking volumetric effect, adding streaks of light against the dust of its saloons and the gold mines later. Again, it adds a satisfying sense of depth to the scene. And later, we see object physics put in the spotlight too. TNT is conveniently dotted around in this finale, with a huge payoff as barrels split open and the bridges collapse. It's all scripted fun, a linear set piece to pin your attention to the best bits. But again, it shows it's all just a huge step up in materials, lighting, and physics for the series. Before we go on, it's worth stressing this build is of course early code, and you may spot a few bugs as we go. Honestly, we'll have to see how it polishes up for the August release. But either way, the next part of play taps into the heart of Saints Row's appeal, taking us to the sandbox of Santo Ileso itself. With the map left wide open to explore, it becomes a new game entirely. Now, one thing I did notice here is our trusty RTX 3080 did start to struggle running at max settings once we're given full freedom. Everything to this point is 4K, and often holding a solid 60fps at max settings. Optimizations are to come for sure, but in this preview build, keeping these settings proved just a bit too much for our trusty 3080, and so I had a backup plan in the resolution slider. Available while running in the game's windowed borderless display mode only, at least for the preview build, dropping the scale to 83% per axis, or 3187 by 1792 natively, balanced out the strain on the GPU. It gets us to 60 FPS more typically, without having to sacrifice the likes of, say, ray traced AO, the shadows, or world draw. Speaking on the settings, Saints Row packs a huge suite of options, at least in this preview build. Just walking around this outskirts area, it's easy to see the payoff for each setting too. Everything updates on the fly, conveniently showing the game world on right as the presets change. So ray traced ambient occlusion is on show here, for example, and using the ultra mode to start, the increments between low, medium and high don't really appear to have a radical impact. The gradients of quality are perhaps too fine to see, even on shading beneath cars or under plants ahead. Now, it's when alternating between RTAO off and the ultra setting that you do really start to appreciate the difference. Rich pockets of shade suddenly appear across the scenery, and at night, during the Starship Troopers style opener, all the objects bed in more naturally into the scene. From all of my playthrough, RTAO proved a taxing setting in my testing, especially at 4K, but I find even at the low preset, the effect is well worth using in the final image. Of course, I'd have loved to have seen more extensive ray tracing support in the form of, say, reflections or GI, and much could change for the final release, but RTAO is still a nice touch, and I'm certainly hopeful it'll appear on the PS5 and Series X releases. For that though, we'll just have to wait and see. Keeping to the settings, I also took a similar look at shadows and SSR presets. Each offers plenty of scalability, and unlike the RTAO setting, the differences between each quality step is more pronounced, more readily apparent. The shadow setting, for example, primarily affects the quality of the suncast and interior shadows, giving, as you'd expect, a sizable performance boost by going to lower settings. Just going by eye, our RTX 3080 here just about pushed to ultra while maintaining 60 FPS at 4K, so long as we kept the resolution scale at 83%. High is certainly acceptable, but anything below that is perhaps too heavy a sacrifice in quality. This applies to up-close detail of shadows, but it's the scene detail setting here that actually alters the quality of shadows and terrain like trees at range. This time, it's just a choice of low, medium and high, and while there's plenty of scalability here, keeping it to high feels almost a must to avoid pop-in being too visible, especially during the game's later high-speed chases around the city outskirts on a bike here. Taking in the details of Santo Ileso at range proved one of the big highlights of the preview. At max settings, there's simply less geometry pop-in, and more detailed shadow outlines. And better yet, it's still perfectly viable for our 3080 setup to hit 60 FPS through it all. In the absence of a ray traced reflections mode though, of course I next set my sights on the screen space reflections option. Again, SSR appears to run the gamut from off to low to medium and then high, and honestly, the high setting proved difficult to compromise on. At high, the engine simply fills out the missing patches of reflected detail across the water body, so notice the missing detail near the land itself. High SSR boosts the accuracy of the screen space mirror image, tightening it to where the land connects with water. This is ideally where our PS5 and Series X versions will land as well, in terms of SSR quality. We'll have to watch this space, though thankfully most of missions don't put water as a focus, with so much action set in the inner city. The rest of my 2 to 3 hour session with Saints Row focused on the so-called side hustles. After an initial heist with the Saints, we're left free to our own devices, free to rile up mobs while leaving bad reviews at motels and restaurants, free to deliver contraband via a cross-city chase with police, and free to fly in a wingsuit to sabotage rival companies. Tellingly, even these tangents have visual high points. The time of day would just organically show off the game's lighting, particle effects, the physics during street battles. We'd also get chase set pieces through canyons, putting a spotlight on the density of oncoming grass and the volumetric lighting as dust billows up behind the cars ahead. It's not uniformly pretty, being at the mercy of time of day and weather settings, but these were all incidental moments where Volition's tech comes together with visually striking results. Again, I will say I did have a few issues with this build's polish. In particular, I suffered a crash that had my save actually reset before I could get much further, which isn't ideal, but still, this is all kind of within expectation for preview builds. We'll see where the final package puts us, and what I saw was more than enough to understand the direction the Saints Row series is taking. By 23rd of August, we'll be back with a full tech breakdown of not just the final PC build, but also the situation on console. My hope? Given the scalability of all the settings we're seeing here, I'd love to see a form of 4K 30fps mode with ray tracing enabled on PS5 and Series X, and then potentially another for 60fps with fewer bells and whistles. Both mode types are increasingly popular ways to show support for newer console hardware, though we'll just have to wait and see. As it stands, this year's Saints Row Reboot has huge promise as a sandbox open world title, one with impressive options for character customization, mission types, and yes, an underlying tech that should hopefully scale well to consoles old and new. That's all from me today though, a super quick look here, but hopefully it was an interesting sneak peek. If you did find this useful or insightful in any way, feel free to like or subscribe, and don't forget to hit that bell for instant notifications as any new video lands. To get a high quality version of this video, check out our Patreon at digitalfoundry.net, and to get in touch directly, just use Twitter. But from me for now, thanks for watching.